We'll get started. All right. So good morning. Glad everybody made it. How were the roads this morning?
In town, they're okay because they've all been plowed. But you look out in the country and you can see the ice and everything. So
25 is good, but I don't know about 24. Oh,
It's cleared of snow.
24, yeah. Real good about it, are they?
Our driveway was worse.
It's questionable.
my driveway was bad too. I couldn't get out without somebody help him plow me
Anyway,
out.
just
So.
get the car going.
We're gonna make it.
Yeah, you got something a long way to go.
Right.
One day I said,
Fire,
man, I
yeah.
wish I had a farmer that had a plow.
I kind of was here. You know,
You can talk to the
and
neighbor.
I wasn't leaving it outside, beside the garage. Right.
All right.
Like I said, I could have.
All I know is they bring in some serious equipment sometimes to plow their parking lot. Boy, oh boy, there's some big tractors. Make quick work of it, but yeah, very much appreciated. All right, so today we're gonna talk about cloning. Last week we talked about genetically engineered children. It's kind of a similar thought, but a little bit of a different direction. So next, just to kind of give a sense for what's on the docket. Next week and the week after, I do want to take a couple of classes to just think through kind of how to appreciate science and still love the Bible, I guess, to put it bluntly. Because there is, well, as we've seen, there's a number of ways in which there's a tension between science and religion, but there shouldn't be. And certainly science is a wonderful tool that some argue actually flows from our theology. But we want to dig into how do we approach it in a faithful way, because certainly the answer is not just we're not going to do anything technological. We're going to become Amish, right? That's not where we're going with all this. But trying to handle it, use it in a God-pleasing way is what we're doing. All right. So to start with, what is your understanding of how cloning works? What is cloning?
Something like another thing.
Okay, make something that's identical to
It's
the
identical
other,
to what you have.
and not just similar to, but identical on a very basic level. Yeah.
You know, the automobile company do it every day. Punch out a fender every day. It's the same.
Sort of
They clone them.
mass production.
Yep.
I guess that's a form of it potentially.
But cloning would be taking the original and then making a copy from the original, not using the same. Because to me, I think of it more like a Xerox copy, right?
Yeah.
So as a secretary, when I run off things from the original, it's close,
It's close.
but it's not the same thing. It's not as clear or crisp. The color isn't the same. So unless I copy the same thing from my computer and it runs off because my computer talks to the copy machine, I can make 100 copies from my computer and they all look the same. But if I take and make one copy and then copy from the copy, not the same. So
And you go a couple steps down the line, and it really,
yeah.
in fact, I think, well, the song sheets from the Lord's Prayer this morning, those are copies of copies of copies, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell looking at those, and a little bit tough to make out perhaps, but I figured it was better than nothing. So, with the song sheet in church, that's a minor annoyance, but if you are creating a new creature, a new life, that's an entirely different prospect. Yeah. So basically, and in terms of human cloning, you're taking the genetic material from one person and using that to make a second person that is genetically identical to the first person. Right? And of course, as you're saying, theoretically, as you go further and further, more and more errors get introduced, and you start to run into difficulties. But that's kind of the basic idea. Now, anyone know someone who has cloned one of their pets, for example? I think I've heard that that's can be done, but I've never known anyone that's done it. Right? You have a pet that dies, and so you clone it, so you have one that's just like
so
it.
expensive for like the benefit, you know?
Yeah,
Like, this
That's
is a
good
puppy.
enough. That's what's good enough to try and clone.
That's right.
The hope is always that you're gonna have a better one next time. I have some more. That's right.
Don't they clone like seed?
Interesting. So it is used in those contexts.
Yeah, they clone like, I know like hemp, things like that, they clone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So in those kind of situations with the seeds, I think we would agree it does not have the same ethical or moral complications that it has with people, right? I think animals, though, that's you're starting to kind of get into certainly the practical questions like you brought up. Having an animal that's worth cloning,
That's a hard one.
but then there are also ethical things. You guys know what's holding us back from human cloning right now? What's the main obstacle to it? From the discussion you've heard.
I would say ethics. How can we clone the soul? You're getting into God's creation.
Yeah. But I mean, of course, scientists are not going to talk in those terms.
No.
But still, ethics is the biggest obstacle to doing it right now, because the ethics of messing around with these kind of things with this kind of technology with a human being is it's not yet ethically justifiable to do with humans. So they are messing around with animals and with seeds, but certainly you can imagine that this would be on the horizon somewhere, on some at some distance at least. And the main verse that the lesson that I brought with me keeps coming back to in regard to this question is the statement of Paul: everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. So this is a technology that, again, is there a scripture that says thou shalt not mess around with this? No, but certainly as we talk through it, there are going to be a lot of concerns raised that raise some, really, in some cases, serious red flags. So let's, on the first page of your handout, there's a hypothetical there. And I think I told you a few weeks ago we're using a set of Bible studies called Redesigning Life. And so this is one of those studies. And at the start of it, you may remember that they had this hypothetical biomed plaza that offered all of these services, anything and everything that you could want, including what we talked about last week, genetic engineering, those kind of things. But in this hypothetical facility they call Biomed Plaza, cloning is one of the things that they offer. So let's start with just that first paragraph. Would someone mind reading that top paragraph? It's a nice, bold, nice big print for you even.
Mr. and Mrs. Johnson arrived at the Biomed Plaza for their appointment at Clone Genetics, Inc. Their 7-year-old daughter was killed recently by a drunk driver while she was riding her bicycle. The doctor assures them that he can clone their daughter, but that she would probably have a different personality, interests, and hobbies. Other than similarity in looks, the clone will be a different person. The Johnsons don't care.
So as we dig into this question, a lot of it's going to be kind of thinking through some of the hypothetical applications and kind of sifting out, is this an appropriate use, or is this a God-pleasing use of them? And then also, there are a couple of questions that are raised by it. that we'll have to wrestle with as well. But what do you think in this case, first of all? So that this couple has a 7-year-old daughter who's killed and they want to clone her.
So does the differences, does that mean that the DNA is not the same?
No, the DNA is the same.
DNA is the same, but the personality could be different.
Yeah, we are more than just the sum of our genes. You know, our experiences impact that. Yeah, and certainly the follow-up question would be how much variation is there? I don't know, but I think part of what it's pointing out there is that if you clone a person in science fiction movies and novels, often it's kind of presented as you have the exact same person, the exact same personality, the exact same thoughts, the exact same, it's really a copy in every sense. But that's not what cloning actually does, right? You essentially have a twin, right? A genetic twin. But then from that point, he or she is shaped by their experiences and their environment. And there are a lot of things that are shaped by those outside factors.
Yeah, that was my question. Identical twins, they do have the same DNA exactly?
If they're identical, yes, they're identical and they're fraternal. Yeah.
Yeah, they would have different personalities. Very similar, though.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah, and certainly there are cases where you have twins that are separated at birth, for example, and they meet much later, and their lives are just incredibly similar, and a long list of respects, and married women with the same first names, and their children have all kinds of weird stuff. But yeah, what would you think? What would you say to this couple, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, who are seeking to clone their 7-year-old daughter?
But it could never be the same, no matter what.
I think that
The
could
DNA
be.
is the same, it doesn't matter. It could never be the same.
I think that could be a very important question to press on them, right? You do realize this is not going to be the same person, right? Because it certainly sounds like they're doing this in order to cope with their grief. And to me, it doesn't seem like the healthiest way of coping with that grief, trying to bring that child back in some way.
And even if they could clone it, wow, the pressure on the child to be their daughter, the other daughter,
Yeah, how do you think that would affect your psyche if you found out that you were cloned by your parents from an older sibling who died? How would you think
She
that
would
would?
be the same age? She would be the same age?
No, she would be.
Or just start out as a baby?
She would start out as a baby and grow, so she would be 7 years younger than her older twin sister.
Well, there'd definitely be an element of they don't really want you; they want the sibling that died.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. You want the sibling to die, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a tension between siblings, isn't
Yeah.
there? Right? Mom likes you best, dad likes you best. One of them's the perfect son, and the other is not perfect. The others are screw ups, or all those kind of dynamics. Seems like that only gets magnified in a case like this. It's going to be just a lot of problems on a number of levels. And so in the Bible studies, there are a couple of different hypotheticals along those lines. But what are some of the other potential uses that you've heard in discussions of human cloning?
Well, like organ transplantation is one of them.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Organ transplant. So
to save the other child that may not have died, but
yeah, so you clone somebody in order to have extra organs, I guess is kind of the idea. Spare parts.
Yeah, sure.
How do you feel about just being the parts donor?
You got all
That's
kinds of
good.
parts
Parts
going.
donor. That's right.
Those spare parts.
Yeah, and the ethics of that, because your parents would have to give permission for that to take place, for you to donate your organs, but, the ethics of it just really bizarre. Kind of a more extreme case, I heard of one author kind of speculating on, on people cloning themselves but without a brain so that they have just whatever spare parts they need. If they need a new heart, right, you can just take the heart and use it yourself. True.
That's where
But
stem
it-
cells come in, because even my dentist, when I went to get my root canal, he said there'll be a time when you don't need to do root canals. They'll just stem cell in your
Okay.
teeth and there you go.
So that's a similar
This is a root
concern,
canal.
but that's a little bit different.
Maybe you can clear up all the bad things, though. All the bad things, that child, all the bad things they do, if you can clear them all up. Spare parts, I don't think it's a good
So-
idea.
So there are a lot of different concerns, practical concerns, ethical concerns with some of those applications. But there are also some more fundamental questions. On page 35 in your handout, question 45 asks, some people have wondered whether a clone will be a human being and have a soul. What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think it can be. I don't think you can clone it. You can clone a soul.
Yeah, the island
That's
phrased
all
it that way earlier. Yeah, you can't clone a soul.
That's all God.
I guess they've never heard the phrase, don't mess with Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Don't mess with God.
Yeah, don't mess with Mother Nature, right? They never heard that phrase.
But yeah, would that clone have a soul? Because certainly in some ways that they're portrayed, like in the Star Wars movies, for example, and stories, the clones in that universe, they're expendable, right? They're just clones. Right? So you can throw them, make them soldiers. We can use them as just cannon fodder, and who cares? They're clones. They die. We'll just order up another one. Right? You can just make more. But that takes you to some pretty dark places too. So I think that question of would a human clone have a soul? That's a why would you say no? That it would not.
Because God makes the soul. I mean, even though He gave them the knowledge to do that, I don't think so. Even that sheep that they did clone, it wasn't right. It couldn't act like a real sheep or be something. It couldn't reproduce by itself. They could not reproduce. So
Okay.
a clone, it just wouldn't have a soul. I don't
You're
think.
still taking, it's not like you're
I
taking,
don't know.
produce this stuff and put it in a printer and somebody walks out. You're still taking, and it's being conceived
Still in a womb.
from a womb. And the only way that works with God, you can say whatever you want. It's like when they genetically modify the plant, they didn't make a whole new plant. They took the science that God has created to make that plant reproduce and grow, and put different characteristics in it to make it the way they want it to work. So it's exactly the same as the other one, but the part of the actual life, the breath, that's from God. There's no other place that comes from.
So you're saying what have a
I
soul?
would think it would have a soul.
Right, is it how that it
You think it would have?
I
I
thought
think it
so.
would, because there's no other way for that to work. It's like, you can irrigate, you can do whatever, but we can't make the sun stop and the sun start and the planets move.
But a plant
Those
doesn't
kind
have
of
a
things
soul.
that we do not understand, we still can't control. Because you could make that embryo and insert all that stuff and have it die every time. It's still God's will that happens. And it was like, I think it was Pastor Allen that said, one of his last sermons that I remember was, if we think that if God's gonna let us stand by, or if God's gonna stand by and let us screw up His creation that much, to take the world, and that was just, I think he was talking about global warming. But in my head, that's still part of this. God's still in control of all of it.
Right.
You know, the Israelites, they were in slavery forever and ever, and out of slavery and in slavery, and God was still in control of it.
Right.
That control does not prevent him from allowing some pretty evil stuff though. So it's an interesting argument.
But then you're saying a clone is not a person, right?
Yeah, if there's no
If you
soul,
say
then
there's no soul,
presumably-
then it's not a person. And I think that if we saw, I don't know, what is God's desire for all people, right? That they come to the knowledge of Him and are saved. And if you're a clone, of course, a clone isn't going to choose whether or not they're born or not, right? Or cloned. Does that make them any less of a person? No, they're still a person, maybe created in the wrong way, or maybe with a lot of defects or whatever, but they're still human DNA and everything like that. So I don't see why God would not save them too.
To me, I think the biggest thing is saying that they don't have a soul, that they're not human. That does take you to some pretty dark places. Then you're just using them for spare parts, and you like I said, you go to some very dark places as a society. But that's, I think, if they are or aren't, that's that it is what it is, right? The outcome does not necessarily make it one way or the other.
I think cloning altogether a human is dark. I think it's wrong to do because it does create so much problem like this.
Yeah. So what's the biblical argument against it?
I feel like you're playing God.
Okay.
I mean,
Child
look at it-
becoming
look at
a
it
product
as-
rather than a
Yeah.
gift.
We've raised animals and plants and everything else that we're cloning. We've done that for years for production to feed humans. We wouldn't do that same thing to continue to keep a human alive by raising a person to keep it alive. Does not seem even close to that.
There isn't a plant or an animal that has a soul though.
Right.
It's a whole different ball of wax.
It's a whole different ball of wax.
It is. Right? And that's why I cannot,
We were made in His image and the cornerstone of the pinnacle of the creation. As screwed up as we are.
And I think you've stumbled on another issue with it too, right? We were made in God's image, and now if we're choosing to make use of technology of cloning, are we seeking to create in our own image? Is that part of what's behind this? What's the motive? Yeah, and there are a couple of different hypotheticals that are given in the handout. The ones that are included are generally along the lines of that first one we read, and we mentioned one or two others. I haven't really heard a case or a hypothetical where cloning seems like it would be a genuine good.
benefit.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I haven't, at least for humans, right? For humans.
Have they gotten that advanced where they can actually clone animals and the animals being?
They can.
Was it they
Yeah,
say
they
Dolly
did-
the
they
sheep?
did-
Well, yeah, but she lasted a couple of years at best, and the age grew fast and died. But has it advanced more than that?
I don't know.
The last I knew, it was like Dolly the sheep was the big thing, and it wasn't right.
Yeah, it didn't live very long, and it could not reproduce.
I don't even know if we'll ever be smart enough to actually clone like we think we're gonna clone. Yeah, is it possible? Yeah, you can make a reject, but it ain't gonna last long.
And certainly you wonder, are they gonna run into this problem that we're wrestling with, that you can't clone the soul? You can clone the biology, but you can't make an actual person.
Well, and that's what I have wondered.
Or it wouldn't survive on its own or something. I don't know.
This
And
one
what would the
brilliant,
quality of life
this
be?
one brilliant scientist said he could make it talking to guys, I can make a person. The guy said, okay. He said, first I'll take a little piece of dirt, and from nothing, I'll take a little piece of dirt. And God said, no, I made the dirt.
Yeah,
So
you
you
can't
gotta,
use that.
if you're gonna start by yourself, do it yourself. So,
Yes, you can
Just-
I made the dirt, so
Yeah.
you gotta start with your own.
speak as an existence. Good luck
And
with that.
occasionally you'll hear reports that scientists have created life in the lab, but what they've done is really, manipulated existing life into new.
Different copies.
Okay,
Yeah, you're
Google
making copies
says Dolly, with the first animal that was cloned, only lived less than 7 years, suffered from serious arthritis, pneumonia, blah, blah, blah. And dogs normally live 12 to 15 years, and a cloned dog is 10 to 12 years.
Oh, we're getting better.
There you go.
We're getting better at it.
And you know that they're working on it, right? You know that they're
Well, I bet
practicing
you
and trying
people
to.
trying humans right now too, but my guess is maybe because it is human, maybe it ain't never gonna happen. That won't let it happen. I don't know. A lot of them scientists, they don't care about ethics. They just wanna do it. Cause they can't.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
Well, at that point, they already
But
have all the
some
AI
do,
stuff
but-
that can learn the way that you want it to be learned. You might as well build it out of robotics and throw some great looking skin on it, and that's their human. Right?
They're getting pretty good at that.
We've got to adapt to that, we've got all this stuff that answers the questions the way that you want it to. Why worry about if somebody that has their own decision power would do it the way you want it to?
Yeah, but some of these people wanna live forever though too, and they're looking for spare
That's
parts.
stem cells, they got
Oh.
keep eating stem cells.
Oh, yeah, having spare parts, yeah, having spare parts, that's appealing to some, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Growing your own replacement organs. So it seems like all the hypotheticals that we're coming up with are, there's something dark about them, something not right about them. And that leads us to one of the verses that is brought out in the study, and that's James chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. James 2, verses 8 through 11. James 2, 8 through 11. So before we read that, let's go to the paragraph, the bottom half of page 36 in your handout. But part of what's at work here is what we talked about last Sunday, that one flesh union, which is how God intended, how God designed for procreation to take place, the union of husband and wife. And then, so that brings us to the paragraph, again, at the bottom half of page 36 in your handout. Starts, Christians must return to the basics. Would someone read that paragraph for us?
Christians must return to the basics of what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and how we are to live the life of Christ in the world. The Lord established marriage as a one flesh union, husband and wife. If it is God's will, a couple may be blessed with a child through sexual procreation or adoption. Viewing cloning from the doctrine of marriage and parenting, the cloning of self, that is, the husband or wife violates the word of God, especially the 9th and 10th commandments about coveting. Of course, when these commandments are violated, then all are broken, since God is author of them all.
And we'll come to James 2 in just a second, but what do you think of that assessment there, that cloning violates the 9th and 10th commandments? You follow the logic there?
Yeah.
How does it break the laws against, or the commandments against coveting?
No other God.
But it's talking about the 9th and 10th about
Yeah,
coveting.
the 9th and 10th.
One, so you can't have
a child. Coveting something that,
Okay.
yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
just.
coveting is one, that's the very definition, right? Wanting something you cannot or should not have. And so if that's the technique that we use, that we turn to in order to get a child that we could not otherwise have, then there seems to be a good dose of coveting going on there. But that paragraph also stumbles on a question about, if you clone someone, who are the parents?
Well, I would guess the parents of the original.
Yeah. But they're not the ones who produced this second offspring. And so we're moving, again, like we talked about last week, we're moving farther and farther from that one flesh union that God intended. So I would argue that it's actually a sin against the sixth commandment too, not because there's some sort of sexual immorality going on, but part of the point of the sixth commandment is honoring that God did create us male and female, and that was good for the purpose of marriage and procreation, and this violates that, tries to seek a different way of creating life. Let's go to James 2 now. James 2 verses 8 through 11. Would someone read that?
If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. Now if you do not commit adultery, but you do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law.
Thank you. So you follow the logic there? How would you explain that? That breaking one commandment makes it guilty of all of them?
Well, if you don't keep one, you don't keep any of them. You are breaking them all. You break one. And that's why we live under grace, under God's grace. We live under the law.
Yeah, if we want to be judged according to the law, then it's all or nothing.
If you have a holding tank with purified water to drink, and you put one drop of poison, even if it's in a little tiny corner, are you going to drink it?
Yeah, I'm just not going to drink from that corner.
Right, exactly. I mean, the whole thing has to be thrown out. So.
And God's standard is perfection. Right? And anything less than that puts us under His condemnation. Right? So, which kind of turns on its head the mindset that a lot of people have of, I have this one thing that I'm very diligent about doing right, and the rest of my life is I do whatever I want, but that one thing, so I'm a good person because I do that one thing. That's not how that works, right? How does that outdo the rest of it? That's the point here. Part of the point is that breaking the law in one area makes us guilty under the whole thing. So then the next page in your handout gets into the question of eugenics, which we talked about last Sunday. So that's the next page, and let's jump to question 51. Because part of what's at work here can be this pursuit of perfection. So let's touch on that really quickly. Question 51: is perfection of human life possible? Because we seem to have this idea that if we just come up with the right genetic tweaks, right, and if we figure out the right methods for parenting and those kind of things, then we can reach perfection. But is perfection of human life possible? And it points us to Romans 3, verse 23. So let's go there next. Romans 3, verse 23. Familiar passage.
For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
So as Jesus said, sin is not something outside of us, right? Sin is not a matter of what we eat or drink, or what goes into our body. It's what comes out of our body. Right? From the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. He's not just talking about the physical organ, right? He's talking about our very nature, about our sinful nature. And so we can certainly try to better ourselves in a lot of ways, but is perfection of life, of human life, possible in this life? Absolutely not. However, is that the end of the story? Thankfully, no. What is the end of the story?
Jesus Christ perfected. Jesus Christ was perfect, and He made us perfect through His death and resurrection.
Yeah. So God's law does condemn us, declaring us all guilty under God's law, but it does that in order to assure us of God's grace and assure us that God has redeemed us, and not just spiritually, but body and soul. And so we look forward to that hope. I think question 52 is also worth taking a minute on. It points us to 1 Samuel 17, verses 4 through 7, and 1 Kings 11. So let's go there. 1 Samuel 17. Samuel 17, verses 4 through 7. Would someone read those verses, please?
And 4 to 17, 4 to what? 4 to 7.
Chapter 17, verses 4 through 7.
And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him.
So obviously we know the rest of that story of David and Goliath. So the question is, does stronger, faster, or smarter necessarily make a better person? Really not in this case.
Usually helps.
What's that?
Usually helps.
In some respects, but not always, right? Sometimes it can become a hindrance. Let's look at 1 Kings 11, 4 through 6. First Kings 11, verses 4 through 6. Who would like to read those?
For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done.
All right, so did Solomon's wisdom help him there?
No.
And you could even imagine him, using that wisdom to try to justify what he's doing in the process. So that wisdom, it helps, but not always. It does not always make a better person. So then finally, let's go to that next page, page 39, just to be reminded of where our hope is. Because there's a danger of kind of going down this line and rightly resisting it and ending up with just, well, we're just human, right? We don't expect much of ourselves. But that's not necessarily where we should go. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 15, so question 54, 1 Corinthians 15. First Corinthians 15. verses 42 to 49. Chapter 15, verses 42 to 49.
So is it with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable, what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven.
Okay. And of course, that next section looks forward to that wonderful day when the perishable has put on the imperishable and the mortal has put on immortality, and then the saying that is written will come true, death is swallowed up in victory. So contrast the promise, quote unquote, of cloning with God's promises here. What are we pursuing through cloning?
Our own self-image.
Our own self-image,
I
yeah.
agree with you.
Some sense of, well, trying to push back death, perhaps. For some, it might even hold the promise of immortality. But this is actually where that promise is located in God's word, and that promise that God is making all things new, starting with you and I. All right, so apparently we're out of time. So yeah, this is a challenging one because it's not as directly applicable to okay, Scripture says this, but there are certainly a lot of serious concerns when it comes to cloning, both technical, can we actually do it? And even if we have the technical knowledge, will it actually work, or is there more to us than just our genetics? That'll be interesting to see.
That's what I think.
Yeah. But at the same time, it does point us ultimately back to that hope that we do have in Jesus Christ.
And we can do all things, but not all things necessary.
Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Okay, well, thank you for the discussion. So next Sunday and the week after, we'll be looking at kind of science in general, how we can improve our relationship with science, and then we'll go from there. We'll turn to a little politics, just all the fun topics.